The Pooh Book of Quotations by A.A.Milne, in which will be found some useful information and sustaining thoughts by Winnie the Pooh and his friends. Illustrated by Ernest H. Shepard. The Pooh Book of Quotations, compiled and edited by Brian Sibley. Pooh knew what he meant, but, being a bear with very little brain, could not think of the words. Do you ever think of things and find sometimes the thing which seemed very thingish inside you is quite different when it gets out into the open and has other people looking at it? If so, then this is the book for you. This book contains the collected thoughts of that celebrated bear with no brain at all, Winnie the Pooh, and his friends and fellow thinkers in the 100-acre wood. Here you will find not only wit and wisdom, but an abundance of usefully useless information, such as how to make a cunning trap for heatherlumps, or how to help and comfort a wedged bear in great tightness. Contents. Introduction. Short for Trespassers, William, in which we find quotations about names. No brain at all, in which we find quotations about having brains and having grey fluff. An old world residence of great charm, in which we find quotations about houses and homes. A little smackerel of something, in which we find quotations about things to eat and eating too much. Unfavourable atmospheric conditions, in which we find quotations about the weather. Ready for anything, in which we find quotations about journeys, searches, adventures, and expeditions. A thoughtful spot, in which we find quotations about thinking and thoughts. A good hum, in which we find quotations about poetry, songs, and hums. Crustamony, proceed cake, in which we find quotations about important things to be done and how to organise others to do them. My mistake again, in which we find quotations about misunderstandings. Animals of hostile intent, in which we find quotations about such strange creatures as heffalumps, woozles, whizzles, jagulars, and spotted or herbaceous baxons. It's hard to be brave, in which we find quotations about being and sometimes not being brave. More friendly with two, in which we find quotations about friends and relations, mostly rabbits. A very good idea, in which we find quotations about having good ideas and some not so good ones. How to win at Pooh sticks, in which we find quotations about games, pastimes, and exercises. Aha, in which we find quotations about making traps and practicing deceptions. What is learning? In which we find quotations about reading, writing, spelling, and Twice-steins. Candles and pink sugar, in which we find quotations about birthdays, parties, and balloons. Something occurred, in which we find quotations about different kinds of accident. A mysterious message, in which we find quotations about notices, messages, and resolutions. Interesting anecdotes, in which we find quotations about useful information, mainly by Owl. Not very how, in which we find quotations about feeling terrible, sad, and pathetic, chiefly by Eeyore. I know you know, and I wish you'd tell, in which we find quotations about difficult questions. Everybody is all right, really, in which we find quotations about getting on with and putting up with others. That Sort of Bear, in which we find quotations just about Pooh, and the index. The introduction. Despite being a self-confessed bear of very little brain, Winnie the Pooh has managed some startling thoughts and said some extraordinary things. So much so that his publisher decided that it would be a good plan to collect them together in a useful book. The trouble is, all the others got to hear about it and started complaining that they were being left out, and that it couldn't possibly be a useful book unless some of their remarks and observations were put in as well. So that is what we did, although it is still called the Pooh Book of Quotations. While we were about it, we also included, in addition to extracts from Winnie the Pooh and the House at Pooh Corner, 1 or 2 quotations from when we were very young and now we are 6, either because they were about Christopher Robin or Pooh or both, or just because we liked them. The quotations have been gathered together according to their subject, such as food and weather, 2 of the most popular topics of conversation in the 100-Acre Wood. And at the end of the book, you will find an index where you can look up specific things like condensed milk and earthquakes, and find out who said what, when, about which and why, and that makes it a very useful book indeed. By Brian Sibley.